Hey guys, YouTuber and editor. Alright, now here I'm continuing with these obscure 2000s Disney movie reviews. And next up, this is going to be a review for National Treasure. So, yeah, this is a movie that, I have heard of before. I do know this movie. But, yeah, this movie, this came out in, 2004. And even, when this movie was released, I never even, heard people, mentioning this movie at all. This film just, really didn't get any mention amongst people at all. So, yeah, so this film really didn't leave that big of an impact, if any of an impact, among people. And yeah, and even the critical reaction to this movie, it was a critics were pretty mixed on the movie. Yeah, it was only in the 45% range on Rotten Tomatoes on the Tomato Meter. So critics were very mixed on this movie, but audiences overall seemed to like it. Yeah, but it just really, I don't think really left really much of an impact. And so it really just was a film that really is just really immediately fell into obscurity and nobody really talked about it. Yeah. So this is another one that really just didn't get really any mention whatsoever. Just really nobody really did mention this movie when it did come out. I really didn't hear anybody really talking about it. And this movie is just one of the movies that really just came and went. Yeah. And even I never had actually really seen this movie before, so I really wasn't too sure exactly what this movie was really about. Yeah. And yeah, after giving it a watch, I gotta say, this movie, I really don't know about this one. I really don't know if I really want to say this film is it's a good film or if it's a mediocre film. I mean, it's not really a bad film, but really just, yeah, I just really don't know what to say about it because, yeah, just this film, yeah, its story just seems to be kind of like a mix of Pirates of the Caribbean and the James Bond movies, because yeah, that's kind of what it seems like. It kind of just seems like one of those spy movies where they're trying to get stuff back, but of course with it being treasure, they're pretty much on a treasure hunt, so it just kind of seemed like these are pirates we're looking for treasure. And so it really just kind of seemed to be a mix of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies and the James Bond movies. And interestingly enough, this film is also produced by Jerry Bruckheimer, who also produced the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. So I don't know if it was blatant to make this film kind of seem like Pirates of the Caribbean, just not pirates. Yeah, but really, just when you watch this film, this doesn't really even really seem like a Disney film. I mean, yeah, I mean when you think of Disney, I mean, do you really think of a kind of a spy movie tone like this movie really has? So it just this just seems really strange to be looking at as a Disney film. So yeah, but yeah, the film, its story is pretty standard. All it really is about is just it's about um this historian and treasure hunter who does learn that there's like uh, that there is actually treasure that his grandfather had actually told him about when he was a kid, and he does eventually when he grows up he realizes that the treasure really does exist. And throughout the film, he's just really he's looking for clues on where the treasure really is. But as that's going on, one of his allies is in an expedition, ends up learning about it too, and he wants to find the treasure instead, and he really does end up going up against the hunter to really find the treasure, and it really is kind of just a battle for who can really get to the treasure first. And throughout the film, the main character, who's the treasure hunter, is really just trying to really prevent the villain in the film to really stop the to really stop him from obtaining the treasure, and really he just tries to steal things to prevent the villain from stealing it so he can't get to the treasure. And so, yeah, and it is basically just a race to see really who can actually find the treasure or first and take it. So, the film really is just really is just kind of that kind of story where it really is just a race between two different groups to see who can really find the treasure first. And yeah, and that's pretty much all it really is about. They each do have their own allies with them on their journeys. like the hero of the movie is he like has like another one of his colleagues with him, as well as a another uh doctor that actually is like working like in one of the facilities that one of the clues for the treasure is hidden in, and yeah, she like ends up like tagging along with the heroes, those in the movie, to really seek the treasure as well. So yeah, so they really do like just kind of like have their own groups to really help them find the treasure in the movie, and yeah, and it is basically just like I said, it is really just a race to really see who can get the treasure first. So yeah, so the story is really standard. I mean, but yeah, it's not really bad, but honestly, it's not really that interesting either. I mean, there wasn't really anything in the film that I really did like have much interest in. Like, I just like found it to be like pretty standard, and I was just kind of bored by it, to be honest. It's just like there's not really anything really intriguing or anything about the film. Like I said, it really is just like we're watching a mix of Pirates of the Caribbean and James Bond. So yeah, so when you see it like that, like just it really just makes you feel like you could just like put on those films just to see the story that this one really does have. So yeah, so the film really didn't really like leave a really big impact, and yeah, and not really like a whole lot of people enjoyed it, but I guess like it must have been successful enough because yeah, this film did result in a sequel a few years later, and they're even like working on another one on right now, as well as like a series for Disney Plus. So so I guess this film has kind of like become a cult classic over the years, but yeah, so it didn't really leave really like an impact or anything when it was released. So yeah, and like I said, this film really doesn't really get mentioned at all today. But yeah, it's not really like the worst or anything. Like it's not a bad film, but yeah, it just is just kind of boring for me, and yeah, it doesn't really leave me with anything to really remember, to be honest. Yeah. So the film, like the cast is just fine. I mean, the film does star Nicolas Cage as the main treasure hunter in the movie, like he's the hero in the film, and the villain is played by Sean Bean, who shockingly doesn't die in this movie. I mean, yeah, this has got to be like a first for Sean Bean. Like, yeah, if you know Sean Bean, you know that pretty much every movie he's in, his character ends up dying. But yeah, and here his character doesn't die, and it is kind of like a surprising that he doesn't die, considering he is the villain in the movie. So, yeah. Well, yeah, history's made. Sean Bean doesn't die in the movie. Yeah, and you also have cast members like Diane Kruger, Justin Bartha, John Voight, Harvey Keitel, Christopher Plummer. Yeah, and the performances are just fine. I mean, there's nothing like groundbreaking about any performances in the film, but yeah, nothing where it just seems like totally phoned in either. So, yeah, the performances are just fine, I guess. I mean, yeah, like I said, nothing groundbreaking, but yeah, I guess they're solid enough. Yeah, and like I said, just the story for the film pretty much is like how they're just it's like learn about the treasure existing, and yeah, and they're pretty much just like racing to try to get to the treasure before the other one does. And throughout the film they're just like journeying around like Washington D.C. and Boston and all these other locations where the clues are located, and yeah, and they do, yeah, and they just are like scattering around looking for the clues and really just trying to advance to the next clue and get to the treasure before the other one undoes. So yeah, so it really is just a kind of like a very standard story, but yeah, it doesn't really, it's not really told in a horrible way. Like it's not absolutely awful, but yeah, like I said, there's just not really anything that interesting about it, and I just find it kind of boring. So I know this film really does have like its fans to it, and I guess like if you can put up with the story, like if you really are like into these kind of stories, and if you really don't mind them really just taking stories from other films, I mean, I guess you will get enough enjoyment out of the movie. But me personally, like I didn't hate this movie, but yeah, I was just kind of bored by it, and yeah, and I really don't think this is a movie that I'm really going to be coming back to all the time and saying I gotta watch it because yeah, this movie just it doesn't really have a lot to offer for me at least. So yeah, like I said, it's not awful, but I don't know if I would really go as far as to say that it's like a really good movie. So I guess I'd probably give this one probably around like a 2.75 stars out of 4. So yeah, uh, so so I'm not really sure if I really would go so far to say that I would recommend the movie, but yeah, it really just comes down to whether or not you are into these kinds of stories or not. So yeah, so yeah, that really will determine whether or not you really will like the movie or not. All right, so yeah, so I guess I'll just get into the premise of the movie. All right. So as the movie opens up, like it opens up in the year 1974, and it shows that uh, uh, Benjamin Franklin Gates like listens to stories that his grandfather tells him about when Charles Carroll of Carrollton passed on like a secret to one of their ancestors in 1832 that there was like a fabled treasure that was taken from ancient empires throughout history, and it was eventually discovered by the Knights Templar, and it was also like later protected by the Freemasons, and shows that like the treasure was actually hidden by the founding fathers, others, and there's like clues leading to the treasure that they hid throughout various locations, and there was a clue that was like saying that phrase that the secret lies with Charlotte. Yeah. So yeah, but Ben's father really just felt that these stories that uh, Ben's grandfather was telling him were just nonsense, but Ben is actually convinced by it. Yeah. And then it cuts to 30 years later with Ben now fully grown. Oh, yeah. And it shows that like he is like a historian, a cryptologist, and a treasure hunter, and he's on an expedition with like his colleagues Ian Howe and Riley Poole. Well, they eventually do find the Charlotte, which was a ship that was lost in the Arctic, and yeah, and Ben remembering what his grandfather told him search for the clue, and then he eventually did find the clue. But they ended up finding a Meerschaum pipe, which contained the clue, which had a riddle, which implied that their next clue is on the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, and Ian then came up with the idea that they should steal the Declaration of Independence, but Ben ended up opposing the idea, and it caused a fight to ensue. And then just after, like, 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 like a fire then ended up being fueled up by gunpowder. Then the three of them split up, with Ian escaping with his men. And then as the ship exploded, Ben and Riley were able to take cover right before the explosion. And then when Ben and Riley ended up returning back to Washington D.C., they tried to report the possible theft of the Declaration of Independence to the Homeland Security, the FBI, and Dr. Abigail Chase from the National Archives, but everybody just dismissed the claim. And then Ben then finally decided that they had to steal the Declaration themselves before Ian could get to it. So then one night, during a gala event and at the National Archives, after Ben was able to get Abigail's fingerprints, they were able to steal the Declaration of Independence before Ian could get to it. But then, as as then eventually the Declaration was then discovered to be stolen. Well, and then Abigail had suspicions about Ben, and then she discovered that Ben actually had the Declaration, and he he seemed to hand it back over to her. But then, as Ian then attempted to kidnap Abigail, Ben and Riley then were able to rescue her, and then it was shown that Ian he got a hold of the Declaration of Independence, but then it was revealed that it was just a souvenir copy. Yeah. Then the FBI then was starting to track Ben down because as Ben had got caught with seemingly attempting to steal a souvenir of the Declaration of Independence from the uh, archives gift shop. So then, it showed that he paid for it, but he paid for it through a credit card. So due to that, like they had his credit card information and were able to get his locations. Yeah. Then eventually, Ben Abigail and Riley then went to Ben's father's house, and then they started looking into the silent and do-good letters that were written by Benjamin Franklin. And yeah, and then it showed how uh, Ben's father still just believed that the treasure was just a myth. But then he eventually then like discovered after studying the back of the Declaration of Independence, it's that they uh, discovered a Ottendorf cipher, or that was written in like invisible ink, and then Ben like realized it was referring to the do-good letters. But yeah, Patrick, Ben's father, Patrick, yeah, that's his name, ended up telling. Well, he ended up donating them to the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. So yeah, Ben, Riley, and Abigail then traveled down to Philadelphia. Yeah, and they eventually interpreted a clue after uh, uh, getting a schoolboy to acquire the letters, keywords, and then they saw that like there was a clue that was pointing to the bell tower of Independence Hall where the Liberty Bell was once residing in. Yeah, yeah, but it also showed that like Ian and his group were on their tails and they questioned that same schoolboy. Yeah. Then eventually, then Ben was able to locate the point of the exterior of the bell house. I was cast by the steeple shadow after he used like the time that was on the clock depicted on the back of the $100 bill, and then he was able to find like a hidden cache containing a pair of glasses with like different colored lens that were made by Benjamin Franklin, and then yeah, then they were able to use the glasses to inspect the declaration that actually showed a clue that was referencing the location of Trinity Church in New York City. Yeah, and then yeah, then eventually then like they ended up getting caught by Ian and his group, and then as a chase ensued, then eventually the FBI ended up finding Ben and then took him into custody. But it also showed that that Ian eventually then did get the possession of the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, but then after Ben was arrested, I said Abigail was able to like convince Ian to help them rescue Ben in exchange for their next clue to find the treasure. And then Ian then agreed, and then he just then arranged a meeting with Ben on the top of the on the flight deck of the USS Intrepid. Then they were able to get Ben out of the FBI's custody. Yeah, yeah, but then then Ian then like returned the Declaration of Independence back to Ben, and in exchange for the next clue. But when Ben like was just saying that like he didn't have any other clues, it was then like shown that like Ian and his crew were actually holding Ben's father as hostage. So then yeah, he pointed them to the Trinity Church and then then along with uh, Abigail, Riley, and Ben's father, they then and eventually used the different lens on the glasses to study the Declaration of Independence some more. And then it showed that like the clue ended up leading them to like an underground passage that was underneath a tomb in the basement. Yeah. And then as they uh journeyed through the passage, it seemingly was leading to a dead end. And that was just like lit by a lantern. But then like afterward it just seemed that Ian and his group were gonna just end up leaving Ben and his father, Abigail, and Riley trapped to die there. Then Ben's father then claimed that there was a reference to the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere and pointed Ian out to the old church in Boston. Yeah. So then they took off, leaving Ben, his father, Abigail, and Riley behind. And then after they left, then Ben's father then just revealed that like the clue that he gave Ian was just fake, and then they eventually found a small hidden treasure room that seemed to be looted. But then, like after Ben and his father then like had a heart to heart moment with like Ben's father being proud of Ben and that he's wrong. Then eventually then notch the meerschaum pipe and stem him fit into, and then he was eventually able to open the chamber that contained the treasure, and it also showed a secondary exit tunnel. Yeah, yeah, and then yeah, after finally discovering the treasure, then like Ben appointed the FBI out to the Old North Church where Ian was headed towards, and then he returned the Declaration and the Declaration of Independence back to the FBI and gave them the treasure's location, and he also ended up receiving clemency and credit for the discovery, and then he eventually led the FBI back to Ian and his men, and they were arrested. Yeah, and then then it showed then at some point later on how uh, Ben, Riley, and Abigail received like a 1% finder's fee for all the treasure rather than like a 10% offer that Ben had turned down. Yeah. Yeah, and it showed that now Riley owned a Ferrari, and Ben and Abigail were now together and bought a new house. Yeah, and then then the movie just ended with like Abigail just giving Ben a treasure map, and then when he asked her where it leads, Abigail just told him, "You'll figure it out." So yeah, so this was like leading towards like the first sequel that was released like a few years later, which was titled uh Book of Secrets. So but yeah, and that's how this movie ended. So yeah, so like I said, it is like a pretty just standard story with just like Ben and Ian just really racing to find the treasure before the other one does. And they have like all that stuff. Like they just like discover the clues and just follow them to the next one. And they have like their own groups with Ben with Abigail, Riley, and his father later on, and with Ian with his own group, so yeah, the story is like just pretty standard, and yeah, like I said, it just seems kind of like a mix between the Pirates of the Caribbean movies and the James Bond movies, because yeah, it just really seems like we're watching both films. Well, yeah, we're just like watching like both of those films, just like as this film like progresses. So yeah, like I said, it's not really a bad movie, but it's just kind of boring for me. Like I just really he wasn't really that invested into it. But yeah, like I said, like if you really are into these kinds of stories, then I'm sure that you might get some more enjoyment out of it. And so yeah, and like I said, like I know that this film really does have its fans, and yeah, and it has become like a cult classic over the years. But yeah, I mean, like I really don't think I really will be a part of that fan base. So yeah, like I said, I'm not really sure if I would really recommend the movie, but yeah, like I said, it really just comes down to whether or not you're into these kinds of stories. But yeah, me personally, just I'm really not. So yeah, so like I said, I give the film a 2.75 stars out of 4. All right. So yeah, all right. So I guess that's all I can really say about this film. All right. So this is my review of National Treasure. So I hope you guys did enjoy this review. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.